Topic given to me for today's webinar is evaluation and management of hypertension. This is my hospital located in Nanded Sayog Nagar. So I will try to cover this webinar under the six headings. First, we will see what is hypertension and what is the need to treat it. What is the why we should treat it, and what are the various causes and various mechanisms responsible for hypertension. We will see how to diagnose it and how to begin initial evaluation of this problem. And we'll come down to treatment part briefly, and finally we'll see some recent advances going on in the field of hypertension. So, what is hypertension? The hypertension is defined as a systolic blood pressure of more than 140 and diastolic of more than 90 by most of the societies. So, there's a contradictory thing in the hypertension that is called hypertension paradox. Basically, it's a funny thing regarding hypertension. It's a condition which can be easily diagnosed, but the asymptomatic nature delays the diagnosis. See the funny part. It can be diagnosed with sphygmomanometer. It's very easy to diagnose. But in spite of that, often the diagnosis is delayed most of the time. And the second funny part is we have a large number of advanced therapy available, safe medicines, a big armamentarium of medicines against this problem, but still it is controlled in only less than 1/3 of the patients. So this is also a paradoxical part. So it is called, that is the reason it is called silent killer, because of asymptomatic nature and less control in spite of having the best of the best medicines available. We'll see about the staging of hypertension. Joint National Committee 7 in the year of 2003 divided blood pressure into 4 stages as normal, pre-hypertension, stage 1 hypertension and stage 2 hypertension. Normal, they are given the value of systolic 120, less than 120, diastolic less than 180. Pre-hypertension 120 to 139 systolic and diastolic between 80 to 89. And stage 1 hypertension, systolic between 140 to 159, diastolic between 90 to 99, and stage 2 hypertension more than 160 systolic and more than 100 diastolic. It was the staging given in 2003. For the 10 years, there was no change in it. The values and stages remained same. In 2013, in the month of May, I suppose, Joint National Committee 8 has given another classification. Mainly, basically, they haven't changed much of the categories or the values of this staging, but only they have given the cutoff value of systolic blood pressure of more than 150 by 90 for the elderly people who are more than 60, and diuretics were in JNC 7 recommended as a first line drug. They were not recommended in JNC 8. After that, in 2017, American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association came up with another classification, another staging of hypertension. They have brought down the cutoff value of hypertension to 130 and diastolic to 80. So they are divided according to this staging AACC AJ 2007 blood pressure into 5 stages. Normal blood pressure between systolic less than 120, diastolic less than 80. Elevated 120 to 129 systolic, diastolic less than 80. Stage 1 as between 130 to 139 and diastolic between 80 to 89. Stage 2 more than 140 and diastolic more than 90. And hypertension crisis, they are defined as a systolic pressure of more than 180 and diastolic of more than 120. If you see this classification, it has reduced the cutoff value by almost 10 millimeters of mercury, and they have declared this staging on the basis of a sprint trial, which was a very large trial conducted in USA. In this, in the sprint trial, they have shown even a slight reduction in the blood pressure can reduce the cardiovascular events to a greater extent. So they have directly brought down the cutoff value from 140 to 130 for labeling as a hypertensive patient. This, if you go by this overnight, this classification has converted so many hypertensive, pre-hypertensive patients into established hypertensive patients. It has become a topic of debate also. Many societies criticize this classification. After this, in 2018, European Society of Cardiology in the Munich, fortunately I was a part of this meeting. They came up with this new classification of hypertension. This classification looks practically somewhat applicable. Practically, it looks a bit acceptable. They have divided the hypertension into 5 stages: normal, high normal, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Normal, they are given the values of systolic between 130, less than 130, diastolic less than 85, high normal between 130 to 139, and diastolic between 85 to 89. Stage 1, 148, 159, diastolic 90, 99. Stage 2, between systolic between 160 to 179, and diastolic 100 to 109. And stage 3, more than 180, and diastolic more than 110, which was earlier diagnosed as this stage was earlier said as hypertensive crisis. So this classification again raised the cutoff value by 10 millimeters of mercury. After this, International Society of Hypertension in the last month only came up with this classification. So very much similar to the ESC classification, where the value of the classification staging is like that only: normal, high normal, stage 1, stage 2. Reading values are also there. Only thing they have added was home blood pressure monitoring. It was advised in this meeting, and it was much pressure or emphasis was given on home blood pressure monitoring and ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. They were given the cutoff value of more than 135 by 85 for home blood pressure monitoring, and for regarding ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, average 24 hours reading they have given us 130 by 80, daytime blood pressure value cutoff value 135 by 85, and night time more than 120 by 70. In 2009, our country's Indian Hypertension Society came up with this classification. Systolic blood pressure 120 by 80 labeled as optimal blood pressure, and systolic less than 130, diastolic less than 85 as normal. High normal between 130 to 139, or diastolic 85 to 89. Stage 1 again 140, 159. Diastolic between 90 to 99. Stage 2, 160 to 179. Diastolic 100 to 109. Stage 3, more than 180, more than 110. If you see this, the classification is similar to European Society of Hypertension. So many societies, they agreed with the cutoff value of 140. Only ACC AHA 2017, they mentioned the cutoff value at 130. Indian hypertension staging, in this methodology, they have also mentioned about isolated systolic hypertension, which was not earlier mentioned in any classification. Stage 1, isolated systolic hypertension, systolic BP of between 140 to 159, and diastolic less than 90. Stage 2, systolic more than 160 and diastolic less than 90. We'll come down to the what are the causes or determinants of blood pressure now. So there can be 2 types of main causes or determinants: behavioral, like nicotine use, heavy alcohol consumption, physical inactivity, or diet which is high in calories, sodium, but having deficit in fresh fruits. Then genetic causes. So what is the reason why we should treat hypertension? What will happen if you don't treat the hypertension? As of now, about 1 billion people worldwide, they are affected by this problem of hypertension. Approximately 100 crore it will come down to. And there are approximately 75 lakhs deaths take place every year with this problem, and that counts to around 1,000 deaths per day, approximately 1.5 minute per one death per 1.5 minute is taking place directly or indirectly due to hypertension. So you can understand the importance of this problem. Often it is neglected, but unfortunately, our country has become now the capital of hypertension. It is already a capital of diabetes. Now it has become capital of hypertension, heading now towards in future of becoming capital of coronary artery disease, road traffic accidents, and obesity. And I don't know why so many disorders are liking our country to become capital. I don't know. Hope we don't become capital of COVID-19. Right now we are at fourth rank, I suppose. So burden is further on the rising trend. Still the cases are rising, incidence is rising. It's an old slide. In 1994, Indian Council of Medical Research has conducted a survey, and they have shown that hypertension is basically predominantly urban disease, and with female preponderance of around 29% and 25% in males. It was found. It was conducted in Delhi. And in rural, on the contrary, you can see 13% and 10%. 13% in males, 10% in females. So, sex-wise preponderance was more in rural area. Males were more affected, whereas in urban area, it was a primary disorder of females. Overall prevalence was more in the urban area. What damage it causes? It is responsible for 54% of stroke, 47% of ischemic heart disease, can cause heart failure, peripheral vascular disease, renal failure, blindness, retinopathy. We all know this. It's a beautiful slide which has shown the risk of absolute risk with rising blood pressure. You can see here with the rise in systolic blood pressure, there is absolute risk is also rising. This rise is more, risk is more as you go higher in the age. Older the person, higher the blood pressure, more is the risk. It's clearly evident regarding coronary artery disease. And similar, more or less similar thing is applicable to stroke also. So it's necessary to control blood pressure. Absolute benefit is shown here of treating hypertension. You can see here number of events prevented on y-axis, on x-axis age is shown. So again the benefit is maximum with the increasing age. Then you can see age around 90, the number of events of all-cause mortality around 70, and stroke around 64, and myocardial infarction around 20 approximately. So with age, the benefit is more with the control of blood pressure. Simply by reducing 5 mmHg of mercury, one can reduce the stroke of risk of having stroke by 14%, coronary heart disease by 9%, and all-cause mortality by 7%. Probably this is the reason why the ACC-AHA came down with a strict criteria of keeping systolic at 130. So, by controlling blood pressure, we can simply say we can reduce deaths mainly happening because of stroke and MI. We come down to what are the causes and mechanisms responsible for this problem. Before you understand the causes, you need to understand the types of hypertension. It can be divided into primary and secondary hypertension. Primary hypertension is the commonest. It's also called as essential hypertension, and 90 to 95% of the patients, they have it. So you can't find a single reversible factor in this. Whereas in secondary hypertension, it may be a curable factor, but it's very rare. It's seen only in 5 to 10% of the patients. The good part is that it's curable, whereas it is most of the time requires lifelong treatment. Primary HT can be again divided into systolic hypertension of young, diastolic hypertension in middle age and isolated systolic hypertension in elderly. You see one by one. In primary hypertension, the systolic hypertension of young, the first category, it happens between the age of 17 to 25 and is probably due to overactive sympathetic nervous system. Whereas the diastolic hypertension in middle age, typically it happens, it occurs in between the age of 30 to 50 years of age, and elevated systemic vascular resistance and reduced ability to excrete sodium by the kidneys is responsible for this category of hypertension. Third one is isolated systolic hypertension, or you can call it hypertension in the elderly. It is also called as the most common variety seen after the age of 55, and it is mainly because of age-related stiffening of the vessels. Again, in this slide, it is nicely, isolated systolic hypertension is nicely shown. Here you can see with rising age, up to the age of 55, both systolic and diastolic blood pressures are rising. And with advancing age, systolic goes on rising in male or females both. But diastolic, see this dip, see this trough, diastolic pressure is falling down. So after the age of 55, so there is wide pulse pressure, and it is called isolated systolic hypertension, nicely depicted in this slide. What are the various mechanisms responsible for these disorders? Mechanisms can be divided into neural, vascular, or hormonal. Neural is simply because of increased sympathetic activity, and there is a deactivation of inhibitory neural inputs or deactivation of inhibitory neural influences over the sympathetic outflow to the heart, peripheral vessels, and kidney. Whereas, on the contrary, there is activation of excitatory influences over the sympathetic nervous system or the heart, peripheral vessels, kidney. So this is the neural mechanism. We will see one by one in detail also in future slides. Vascular mechanism, endothelial dysfunction has been labeled as one of the reason, and in hormonal there is abnormality in RAAS, renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. Coming down to the very beautiful slide showing central nervous system, dotted lines they represent inhibitory neuronal influences, whereas the solid lines they represent excitatory neural influences on the sympathetic outflow to the heart, peripheral vasculature, and kidneys. So there is deactivation of this, or there is suppression of this inhibitory neural reflexes in hypertensive patients, and there is exacerbation or excessive activation of positive neural influences. So this leads to imbalance. Normally there is a balance between this inhibitory and excitatory outputs to the heart, vessels, and kidney, but in hypertensive patients, unfortunately, there is imbalance, and this inhibitory neural influences, they are suppressed. So this is neural mechanism. Coming down to vascular, second mechanism of hypertension, that is vascular mechanisms. Here you can see in this slide, there are certain substances which are released by RBCs and platelets. These substances, they act on the endothelial receptors. Here in the yellow color circular areas, they are the endothelial vascular receptors. So these receptors, they release vasoconstrictive and vasorelaxing factors. Vasorelaxing factors include nitrous oxide, which causes relaxation of the smooth muscles present in the arterial wall, whereas angiotensin causes smooth muscle contraction, so leading to contraction of the vessel. So basically, it is main problem is there with imbalance between this angiotensin and nitrous oxide. Again, normal in persons, normally it remains in the equation, normal in balance, but in hypertensive patients, there are excess of angiotensin substances and there is deprivation of nitrous oxide. So that was a vascular mechanism explained in causing hypertension. Coming down to third mechanism, which is alteration in renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. Here in this slide, you can see kidney, they play a very vital role in controlling blood pressure. Kidney normally they release prorenin. In hypertensive patient, excessive prorenin is released, which is converted to renin. Angiotensinogen is converted to angiotensin 1 by this renin, and angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2 by angiotensin converting enzyme. This angiotensin 2 acts on the angiotensin receptors, which are situated in the central nervous system, vascular endothelium, adrenal cortex, cardiac myocytes, and kidneys. So this stimulation of these receptors causes sympathetic activation in the central nervous system, spasm in the smooth muscle cells of the body vessels, and hypertrophy of the cardiac myocytes. So often we prescribe angiotensin receptor blocker for reducing the left ventricular hypertrophy. And by acting on kidneys, it causes sodium retention, increasing total blood volume, rising blood pressure. Similarly, on adrenal cortex, it has got the tendency to release aldosterone, which causes sodium retention and arterial wall fibrosis. So this was the renal angiotensin system responsible, abnormality, dysfunction or malfunction responsible for developing hypertension. Now we'll come down to diagnosis and evaluation. How will you diagnose this condition, and how will you initiate this evaluation of hypertensive patients? Minimal tests which are required for the evaluation are blood electrolyte values, glucose, fasting PP, HbA1c, kidney function test, and eGFR, uric acid, fasting lipid panel, hematocrit, and 24 hours urine albumin selected patients, urine analysis, resting toilet, ECG, and 2D echocardiogram and thyroid stimulating hormone function test is also needed, which is not shown in this slide. 2D echo and TSH is mandatory in each and every hypertensive patients. Regarding evaluation, there should be 3 goals when you evaluate a hypertensive patient. Number 1 should be accurate measurement of blood pressure. Number 2 should be assessment of patient's cardiovascular risk. And number 3 should be detection of secondary forms of hypertension. We will see one by one. Measurement of blood pressure can be of 3 types. Office blood pressure measurement, which we measure in cabin, self-monitoring at home, and ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. Much emphasis has been nowadays being given to ambulatory blood pressure monitoring in the last 5 to 6 years. Every conference and every guidelines, they recommend diagnosis to be made on the basis of ABP, not on the basis of office BPM and self-monitoring. So reasons I will tell in future. Next slides. So BP in office, how will you measure? There are certain criteria. When you measure office blood pressure in the office, at least you should take 2 readings, and it should be 5 minutes apart, and take the average of that. And patient should sit on the chair with the back supported and with empty bladder, and he should not have smoked, should not have taken alcohol, or should not have done strenuous work, or main importantly, should not talk while taking the reading. And once you get the elevated reading, you should confirm it in contralateral arm. So these are the ideal criteria, but I don't think we follow in our clinical practice because of the rush of the patients. Because in most of the European countries, because they have a limited number of patients, they are able to follow these guidelines. Regarding self-measurement of blood pressure, it provides information on response to therapy. It helps in improving the adherence to therapy and in evaluating white coat hypertension. Coming down to ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, it is indicated no doubt for white coat hypertension and also for masked hypertension, where this office blood pressure is often normal, and home blood pressure or in night blood pressure is elevated, just opposite to white coat hypertension. What happens in white coat hypertension? You get elevated blood pressure in cabin and at home, and outside the clinic, blood pressure is So just opposite of that, that is masked hypertension. That also can be detected via ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. It can be used to confirm when there is a difference in office and self-measurement readings. To confirm self-measurement when inconsistent with in-office BP measurements. So this is very important, ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. Here, as I said earlier, self-measurement of blood pressure increases awareness and adherence. One thing is that we should give proper instruction to the patient regarding the technique used and proper application of the cuff. And that device and cuff should be checked by the physician frequently. And the meters also, they should be validated and they should be calibrated time to time. Otherwise, there are high chances that you may land up with the wrong reading. Home blood pressure of more than 135/85 is defined as cutoff value for hypertension, and for diabetic and kidney patients, 125/75 is the limit. And for saying that the blood pressure is well controlled, at least 50% of the measurement should be below or at goal level. As I said earlier also, ABPM is not only useful for masked hypertension, white coat hypertension, it's also able to detect nocturnal hypertension and daytime hypertension, baroreflex impairment. One problem with ambulatory blood pressure monitoring is when patient apply it to his waist, during the night there is often inflation and deflation of the cuff that often disturbs the sleep of the patient. Nowadays, newer monitors have came up. They have pulse oximeter like probe, which has to be applied to the finger of the patient, and it records the blood pressure by a pulse wave velocity mechanism. It is approved in certain countries, European countries, but not accepted and approved at world level.
In between, explain in Hindi.
Normal recommended values regarding ABPM, average daytime BP is given as 135/85, and night time should be less than 120/70, and average of 24 hours should be less than 130/80. So individual having BP of more than 135/85, average 24 is said to have hypertension, whereas in night, if the BP is more than 120/70, can be labeled, and average more than 130/80 can also be labeled as having hypertension. Very nice slide which depicts superiority of ambulatory blood pressure monitoring over normal blood pressure. Here we can see with rising blood pressure, the events which took place in 5 years, they are well shown with ABPM readings. Well, they correlate with ABPM reading. See, this clinic wave is going like this, and ABPM is showing a much higher risk. So we can say superiority of ambulatory over office BP measurement as a measure of cardiovascular risk. So always it is better to prefer ABPM over office BP. We have seen various measurement techniques, various measurement methods. Now we will come down to the assessment part of the various cardiovascular risk factors. They should be assessed. Most of the high-risk patients, they include cardiology patients, especially having CAD or other risk factors of CAD. They may have carotid artery disease, peripheral arterial disease, abdominal aortic aneurysm, cardiac failure, or high risk for CAD, Framingham 10-year risk score of more than 10. So these risk factors should be assessed, and one should assess for subclinical target organ damage also, like LVH, can be very well assessed with the help of ECG or 2D echo. Carotid wall thickening or plaque should be assessed with the help of carotid Doppler or MR angiography. EGFR and microalbuminuria should be seen to see if there is involvement of kidney. Ankle brachial index is also a measure of peripheral vascular disease, where the blood pressure in the ankle region divided by the blood pressure in the brachial artery, reading value is taken. Normally it is 0.9 to 1.3, Any value less than 0.9 is considered as abnormal, and it is because of the reduced flow in the peripheral vessels because of the stenosis or atherosclerosis. Left ventricular hypertrophy is shown there because of the constant pressure putting on the left ventricle because of hypertension. And you can see entire left ventricle is thickened, whereas rest of the heart is near normal. It's more than 2 centimeters. Should also see for the established target organ damage like ischemic stroke, hemorrhage, TIA, myocardial infarction, heart failure, nephropathy, renal impairment, peripheral artery diseases, and retinal abnormal retinopathy changes. So these are also should have to be evaluated. Now coming down to third part, that is identification of secondary forms of hypertension. Secondary hypertension usually the prevalence is between 5 to 10%. Amongst that, renal disease dominate with around 2 to 5%. In that also, renal artery stenosis is commonest. Then comes the number of endocrine diseases like pheochromocytoma, Cushing's syndrome, Conn syndrome, acromegaly, hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism also. Coarctation of aorta is also responsible, and certain atherogenic causes, which includes hormonal use of NSAIDs, anti-cold decongestant use, OCP use. So these all are the causes which are identifiable secondary forms of leading to hypertension. One good thing about this is that if you remove the causative cause, patient can have a normal life. Like suppose if patient is having receiving NSAID or OCP, simply by addressing this issue or telling the patient to stop this can relieve his hypertension. Whereas renal artery stenosis, simply by opening the renal vessel by the stenting, can relieve his problem of hypertension. So it's important to identify secondary form. There are certain clues which point you towards renovascular hypertension, like sudden onset and severe resistant hypertension occurring before the age of 30 years or after 50 years. Whenever you encounter such an individual who is having sudden abrupt rising blood pressure, very high, more than 180, like 200, 220 systolic, diastolic more than 100, should suspect, and with some symptoms of atherosclerotic disease elsewhere in the body, you should suspect. Along with that, he will have negative family history of hypertension, will be a smoker, there will be worsening of renal function after RAS inhibition, and recurrent flash pulmonary edema could be there. The patient may have recurrent history of landing up into pulmonary edema. Probably young individuals landing up into hypertension, very high BP with pulmonary edema. Obviously, you should suspect. In this, you may get abdominal bruise periumbilically, or you may get fundal changes in the retina. Coming down to certain emergency situations in hypertension, hypertensive crisis. Excuse me, can you unmute? There is a lot of voice disturbance. Can you unmute all?
Yes, sir, I did already. Please go ahead.
Thank you. In hypertensive crisis, the blood pressure is systolic is more than 180 and diastolic is more than 120, and it can be divided into hypertensive emergencies and hypertensive urgencies. In hypertensive emergencies, there is a target organ damage is there, along with very high BP, more than 180 by 120. Whereas in hypertensive urgency, there is no target organ damage. Hospitalization is recommended here in hypertensive emergencies with target organ damage, whereas it is not recommended in hypertensive urgencies. So any patient with more than 180, 110 with some target organ damage, admit him, keep under observation, assess, evaluate. Hypertensive emergency again can be divided into malignant hypertension and accelerated hypertension. In malignant hypertension, patient often has papillary edema along with high BP reading of more than 180 by 120. And accelerated hypertension, patient may have sudden surge in blood pressure above his normal value and going right above the 180, clicking above 180 or 110 with target organ damage without papillary edema. hypertension urgency, there will be only slight elevation in blood pressure, there is no target organ damage. Along with this condition, you should also see for whether the patient is having resistant hypertension or refractory hypertension. When you will say resistant hypertension, when the blood pressure is more than 140/90, despite use of 3 drugs, one of them being a diuretic with optimum or full dose. In spite of that, if the blood pressure is remaining above 140/90, it is labeled as resistant hypertension. And refractory hypertension is the hypertension when consecutively for 3 visits in the last 6 months, if the BP remains above the 140/90 in the office of doctor, then it can be called as refractory hypertension. There is one more entity, that is pseudohypertension. That is due to arterial wall abnormality. But if you measure intra-arterial blood pressure, it will be normal. This because of some fibrosis or some collagen disorders affecting the vessel wall. So you should know resistant, refractory, and pseudohypertension also. Coming down to the last area, treatment part of it. Our goal of treating hypertension is to get to the goal. And the goal for hypertensive patients in general is less than 140/90. But in earlier, actually, this was old slide. Earlier in diabetic and renal patients, the goal was given as 130/80, but current guidelines, they have given the value of same as 140/90, same as for the normal individual. There is no difference between normal person or diabetic or kidney person. Earlier in JNC 7, it was there. Every patient of blood pressure should be given their blood pressure written on their case sheet. Verbally also should be declared to them, and along with their actual reading, what the ideal goal should be verbally documented and verbally said and documented also at every visit. I will cover treatment overview under 4 headings: lifestyle modification principles. The same apply for prevention of any lifestyle disorder. Then pharmacological part, which drug to start, when to start, initial therapy, combination therapy, we will all cover in this part. Then what to do when your patient is still not at a goal in spite of giving him best of the best drug, what we will do, and how to follow up and keep monitoring of our hypertensive patients. We'll see one by one. Coming down to lifestyle modification, again, weight reduction, adopting DASH diet, dietary sodium restriction, physical activity, and moderation of alcohol and nicotine, they will bring down a significant number of blood pressure readings. Simply by reducing weight, 10 kg weight loss reduces blood pressure systolic between 5 to 20. Approximately 1 millimeter of mercury blood pressure is lowered with 1 kg weight loss. Similarly, DASH, I will explain in next slide what is this DASH eating plan is. Reduces blood pressure between 8 to 14. Dietary sodium restriction. Ideal sodium recommended is consumption of between 1.5 to 3 grams. That will amount to about 3 to 4 gram of common salt. One should use less than 4 gram of common salt. That will bring down the blood pressure by 2 to 8. Physical activity. WHO recommends approximately 150 minutes of aerobic activity for 4 days and anaerobic activity or weight training for 2 days per week. Should also bring down blood pressure by 4 to 9. And limitation of alcohol and quitting smoking also reduces blood pressure. So by applying all these lifestyle modifications, you can reduce the blood pressure simply without medicines up to the tune of 25 to 30 millimeters of mercury, which is quite a significant number. What is the DASH eating plan? DASH stands for Dietary Approaches for Stopping Hypertension. This was initially published in New England Journal of Medicine in 2001, where they mentioned that this diet should contain, that should have low saturated fat, low cholesterol, and low total fat. It has emphasized much on fruits, vegetables, and low-fat dairy products. it has discouraged the use of red meat, sweets, and sugar-containing beverages. Encouraged use of magnesium, potassium, calcium, protein, and fiber. Sodium recommended is 1.5 to 3 gram. If you apply this eating plan, you can get the results in 2 weeks, at least. Coming down to medicinal pharmaceutical part, in this we will see algorithm of decision for first means decision of when to start, at what value we should start medicines. So what to start, when to start. If the blood pressure is well above less than 120 by 80, very ideal or very normal, optimal, you can simply advise the patient to keep healthy lifestyle, and 6 months he can follow up and check his blood pressure. If the blood pressure is systolic between 120 to 129 and diastolic less than 80, so he can be advised home BP monitoring, no need to start treatment with, of course, lifestyle changes. If the systolic blood pressure is between 130 to 139, diastolic between 80 to 89, if there are no target organ damage like LVH or diabetes or retinopathy, it can also be put without medicines on lifestyle measures and should be monitored with home BP monitoring every 2 monthly, 3 monthly. If this if the patient with this reading has diabetes or target organ damage, it should be treated with medicines along with lifestyle. JSS7 recommended low-dose diuretic as initial therapy, but current guidelines, they have given the option of ARB or AC inhibitor along with, or calcium channel blocker or diuretic. Anyone you can choose. In this slide, only LDD was shown because it was a actually old slide. Then those individuals with blood pressure of systolic 130, 139, diastolic 80, 89, who have target organ damage, as I said, they should be treated. And those having systolic blood pressure above 140 up to 160, diastolic between 90 to 100, with compelling indication, they should opt the drug which is suitable for their compelling indication. I will explain in next slide what does this compelling indication means, plus minus AC inhibitor, ARB, calcium or diuretic. Those without compelling indication, you can go with A or C or D. In one, you can choose ARB, calcium or diuretic. If the blood pressure is uncontrolled, then additional drugs to be added to achieve the goal. For all the ages above 160 by 100, most of the patients will require 2 drugs. And you can combine AC inhibitor, ARB. AC inhibitor nowadays is less commonly used. We are using ARBs only. ARB or calcium channel blockers can be combined, or diuretic can also be combined. Any 2 drugs can be combined. So this was the what to start when the patient has all these readings. Now, coming down to compelling indication, what is the meaning of compelling indication? So these compelling indications are the associated comorbid conditions in which a particular antihypertensive drug will have, apart from its antihypertensive property, it will have a major improvement in outcome. For example, beta blocker in angina or coronary artery disease. So in angina, if the angina patient has, then the beta blocker or CCB will be the drug of choice. Patient has atrial tachycardia or fibrillation, beta blocker CCB of non-DHP variety like diltiazem. Patient has cough and AC cough because of AC inhibitor, definitely ARB will be the choice. Cyclosporine-induced hypertension, CCB will be preferred. Diabetes with proteinuria, definitely AC, ARB, low-dose diuretic CCB, beta blocker, last option in diabetes. Dyslipidemia, alpha blocker, essential tremors, beta blockers, non-selective variety like propranolol, Ciplar. Heart failure, currently they have come up with ERNI, angiotensin receptor neprilysin inhibitor. That is a combination of valsartan and sacubitril. there are now preferred drugs. ARB can be used, and amongst beta blocker, carvedilol is preferred whenever the patient has heart failure, and diuretic, of course. If there is hyperthyroidism, again you have to go with beta blocker, preferably non-cardioselective propranolol. If the patient has migraine, go with beta blocker, non-cardioselective, CCB also can be given. Osteoporosis, thiazide, preoperative hypertension, beta blocker, previous MI, beta blocker, cardioselective, of course. I forgot to tell in this slide also, here in angina, beta blocker should be cardioselective, preferably bisoprolol. I will personally prefer over carvedilol or nebivolol. Bisoprolol will be more useful whenever you enter under a patient of hypertension with angina. Similarly, in previous MI also, I will prefer beta blocker like bisoprolol. And preoperative hypertension, you can use either of the non-CS beta blocker or CS beta blocker. Prostatism, definitely alpha blocker, because it will help in reducing the size of the prostate. Renal insufficiency, ARB or loop diuretics. Isolated systolic hypertension, you should go with CCB and diuretic and CCB in elderly patients. Then simply we get some patients with plain anxiety or those who are nervous patients with anxiety. So you should prefer beta blocker. Either depends on the physician whether he will prefer non-cardioselective or cardioselective. If he suspects patient doesn't have any other comorbid or other metabolic or other risk factors, he can put him anxiety neurosis patient on non-selective beta blocker. If there are other risk factors like obesity and or family history of cardiac disease, then he will require selective beta blocker. So, what drug to choose? What is the algorithm? We will see in this chart, algorithm of therapy. Which drug should we choose? First choice should be, as I said earlier, either ARB or calcium channel blocker or diuretic. In this slide, they have shown low dose thiazide diuretic, but current guidelines recommend either you can use ARB, calcium, or diuretic, any one of them. Second choice should be appropriate for the compelling indication. As per the condition, you should select second drug. Like if patient has prostatism, go with alpha blocker. If patient has coronary disease, go with selective beta blocker like bisoprolol. Tachyarrhythmias, heart failure, same. Then if your patient has heart failure, systolic dysfunction, proteinuria and coronary disease, ARB can be preferred. Elderly systolic hypertensive patient, peripheral vascular disease and angina, calcium channel blocker will be preferred, particularly in elderly and peripheral vascular disease patient where beta blockers are contraindicated. If the BP is uncontrolled with these drugs, go with the third choice, which is not there. The drug which is not there in this group, you should select as a third choice. What you will do when a patient of your patients is still not at a goal in spite of the full treatment, you have to optimize the dose. You have to add anti-hypertensive, another molecule. You have to see that your combination is rational. C for the causes of secondary hypertension, C for the causes of resistant hypertension. See that your prescription should be rational. Common causes of inadequate response are pseudo-resistance, where faulty BP measuring techniques or white coat effect could play a role. Non-adherence to therapy, most of the patients, they don't adhere to the therapy. There are certain drug-related causes like patients on steroid, NSAIDs or hormones can give rise to rising blood pressure and difficulty in getting control. There are certain associated conditions like hypohyperthyroidism, metabolic disorders, migraine, simply febrile patient or any comorbidity can create a problem in controlling blood pressure. Secondary hypertension definitely should be seen as a cause for inadequate response to therapy. Volume overload, excess consumption of salt. How a physician is going to improve his maintenance of therapy. First of all, doctors should be aware of the problems leading to non-compliance, most important part. Clearly, he should communicate the goal of the therapy. near normal tension with few or no side effect. Means if suppose patient is having very high BP of 200, 100 diastolic, 200 systolic, don't tell him that, you give him the target of 120 by 80. Tell him, motivate him of getting blood pressure of 150 by 90 like that, or 140 by 90 like that. So don't compel him for drastic reduction. You will end up with side effects then. Educate the patient. Education of the patient is very important in lifestyle disorders. About explanation about the disease and its treatment. It's very important nowadays to keep contact with the patient. Now there are various softwares, various more electronic modes with which patient can be kept in contact. Living in this economic country like this, medicine should be simple and inexpensive. So one of the important reasons for non-compliance or difficulty in maintaining costly therapy. So you should keep inexpensive and simple therapy. Prescribe according to the guidelines or according to the pharmacological principles. Principle should be a rational approach, rational prescription. Try one class. If it is unsuccessful, then try a different class of the drug. You anticipate certain side effects. When there are effects, there are likely going to be side effects also. Communicate with the patient. You are likely to get this effect with this medicine. Tell the patient, you are putting him on calcium channel blocker, telling that you are supposed to get some mild edema over the feet. Nothing to worry. It will be just a cosmetic effect. Putting him on beta blocker, tell him side effect. Non-selective, tell him about the sexual dysfunction and libido. Explain in future so that he will not be confused or will not be in shock after getting those side effects. Add medicines in an effective and tolerated manner, stepwise. Don't put so many medicines so that patient should not land up into side effects, too much side effects of hypertension. Always keep on taking feedback from the patient and always congratulate him or always validate him for his success. Motivate him. This will motivate him and this will encourage him. When your doctor validates or motivates his patient, it's a big achievement for the patient. He feels internally very happy with this. Lastly, I will finish my talk coming down to last slide of my topic, recent advances. Self-management support, they have recently came up in this. Much emphasis has been put on self-home BP measurement and lifestyle modification. Then renal sympathetic denervation is a technique where this sympathetic nervous supply is disconnected from the kidneys, thereby reducing the inhibitory neural influences. And baroreceptor stimulation is also one of the technique where it can reduce the resistant hypertension. And surgical sympathetic ganglionectomy is another surgery they have come up with, where they remove the surgical ganglion, which supply the fibers, autonomic fibers to heart, peripheral vessels, and kidney. So this was all about hypertension evaluation and treatment. I tried to control